Good morning, everybody. Thank you for your patience as we get started and the whole shebang. I'm glad you guys are here. I know you have to be here anyway because it's like morning time and like let's get our day started and class started. But I'm really happy to see you all. I think we're going to have a really nice conversation today. This is one of those rare moments also. Most of you probably aren't because I'm finding this a lot with students. But if you are on Twitter, we'll also be doing sort of live tweeting during the event. And this is always where I do my disclaimer. I don't know if I'll actually pull it off. Actually, I don't think I'll pull it off. Everything that usually if I'm giving a paper, I can manage to give the paper and kind of tweet at the same time, but I'm not going to try and pull it off today. But if you see me on my phone, don't be like, oh man, Professor Parham went rogue and just started like sending text messages. But it's just me doing Twitter at the same time, and I invite you guys to do the same thing if you're interested. I won't even get mad at your computers or your phones or anything else, because I will understand why this is happening. So just by way of introduction, let me just say that my name is Marissa Parham. I teach here at Amherst College. I'll say more about myself in a moment, but the capacity in which I'm here today and to start today is I'm here as a director of 5 College Digital Humanities. As many of you all know, the idea of digital humanities is teaching people to use technology so they can ask new humanities questions, right? So it's like we want to ask some of the same old questions, but do it in really new ways, which leads to new question asking. Also in digital technologies, and it's a little bit of what we'll be talking about today in digital humanities, it's thinking about the ways in which new technologies also bear critique, right? These are things that we ourselves have to learn to talk about. And so part of the purpose of digital humanities is really giving people a sense of how you have these broader conversations about technology in intelligent ways without being an engineer necessarily or being a computer scientist or so on and so forth. It's incredibly important that we learn to do this. So today, we're really excited to have with us 2 speakers who I think will be amazing. We're thinking of formatting it as a conversation between the 3 of us, but then, of course, we'll also open up to the audience as well. So I think with that in mind, hopefully you're all settled. You all have your breakfast. As you'll see, also, we're doing some recording. So don't be shy. If there's a moment afterwards, we're like, that was so terrible, we can help you, don't worry. There's always editing and etc. So we're going to get seated. We're going to get started. And hopefully we're going to have a really good conversation this morning. Thanks. Oh, and if you are tweeting, you can find our handles up here. Also tweet the 5 Col DH.
Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. My name is Kari Polk. I'm an assistant professor of Black Studies and Sexuality, Women, and Gender Studies here at Amherst College. And it's wonderful to have Binyavanga here because not only am I teaching him in one class, Black Sexualities, but also in another class, Black Europe, we've been thinking about the stakes of what it means to be an Afropolitan. And Binyavanga, one of the things that I was doing before we started our talk today, I was looking at your Twitter feed, and very recently there's a very funny hashtag. Hashtag great Afropolitan names. And some of my favorites were Solange Nefertiti de Saint Fanon, Donna Summer Bongo, and Lord have mercy, Lumumba Ata Korti. Right? Now, the term Afropolitan is a very interesting term, coined by novelist Taye Selassie in 2005 in her essay Bye Bye Barbar, or What Does It Mean to Be an Afropolitan? And I'm interested if you think that perhaps we're in an Afropolitan turn in terms of thinking about the combination of writing by African authors intersecting with the technology of social media. And what does this mean in terms of creating community? And are there possible limits in terms of how we might understand Afropolitan identity today?
Okay, so that's a controversial position because if you wear African fabrics, then you're going to be an Afropolitan and you must deny it. So I deny all affiliations with the Afropolitan movement right now here, and it's been documented. Look, I'll give you an example of something. I lived in South Africa for 10 years, and through the whole period of before apartheid fell properly, I mean, I came just after Mandela had been released. And so, like somebody like me, let me call myself an Anglo-Kenyan without Anglo-culture, something like this, right? Which is to say somebody without a language or from the missionary-educated sort of elite, if you want to call it that. I put that term well. I find that in terms of a certain kind of clarity, like how there's a certain self-explanation the Indian schooling system has that better clarifies part of the problem of being an African, which I think are kind of fucked up, right? Okay, I'll just be honest. Am I allowed to use that word?
Yes, you are. Yeah. Very much.
Sorry.
All adults here. Children
I just had a beep going off somewhere. So I went to Bangalore, which looks like Mombasa, and of course, like there's this whole idea that India was this kind of original software, and then now when they had transplanted and figured it out, they came to Kenya or Nigeria and whatever, and then just did the light version, right? And so, for example, the fact that that in Kenya the official language is English, and nowhere in our constitution or any documents does it mention the other 46, right? They're just like other. You're free, but you're hanging in this suspended animation of nowhere, right? And the fact that our education system, which has sought to delete tribalism, which kind of means you make policies completely to make sure that people can't animate a modern existence, transact, act, do documents, learn in their own languages. So then you just imagine it'll all go away. And then now our population is booming, and then people are speaking their languages more and more, not less and less, right? So then I'm in India, and then someone tells me, oh, Zizek is releasing his book in the language that is spoken in Kerala. I think it's like Manaman. I don't know. Does anyone know?
Malayalam.
Malayalam, in Malayalam. So let's go to Kochi. So first, it's kind of weird because all like the colonial infrastructure is intimately familiar, and you recognize a lot of, I don't know how you can call it, familiar colonial body language, certain Victorian attitudes that you kind of recognize, but they're familiar. So we arrive in a town hall that looks very much like the town hall of my hometown, and there's a hip-hop concert next door, and they're releasing a translation of Zizek's latest book in Malayalam. Mm-hmm. So somewhere in the process of all this, I figure out that each state, or most states, have each their education language policy. So that most students in each state, in federal state in India, actually go to school, do physics, chemistry, biology, literature. So in Kerala, they do it in Malayalam. Then you have different options. If you're in the south, some people do and Tamil and English and so on and so forth. So all these languages are assumed, and this comes back to the idea of Afropolitanism, are assumed that, like the standard, and this is what this thing impressed me deeply, right? The standard is that a student will complete and be able to carry themselves in all 3 or 4 languages anyway, right? Because the right to sort of self-determine your fate in those free ways assumes you to be expanded. And so immediately you're coming back to the idea of how the nation state, when you say Anglophone versus Francophone in Africa, is the most diminishing idea. Like it takes you back to ground zero, where you're an anthropological species that our nation state makes for us, who has made themselves to be the beast that the colonial system wanted to define us as. I'll just put it as crudely as that, right? Mm-hmm. So this kind of like bothered me. Then they're like, oh no, Derrida was translated from French into Malayalam before he was translated into English. So like that selfhood somehow mattered so much, right? So somewhere now I'm in South Africa and there's this raging debate because of SAB3. And SAB3 is let's call it the bougie white channel of public radio. It's the, it's
NPR.
the, yes, NPR. Yeah. What's that Toyota that professors like? It's that one, yeah? The Prius.
I don't actually know.
So, of course, as a nice Anglo-Kenyan, I was like always on SAB3. You know, they're like, okay, today we're going to have some jazz and Proust and so on and so forth. Okay, so there was this big debate about so public television and public radio in South Africa was done in many languages because of the apartheid division. So it was very peculiar being a Kenyan and seeing, what's that cartoon called that has, oh my darling Clementine. Okay, they don't know that cartoon, I'm sure. It's not like cow and chicken. It was like, but one of those, that era one. I can't remember. So in Sesotho, right? So they had this kind of, for all that fucked up apartheidness, all these things were happening in parallel translation. That was the kind of bribe, separate but equal, blah, blah, blah. So of course, but apart from policy-wise, it became immediately apparent to me that black South Africans in particular, and actually almost no one else in South Africa to a degree, were multiphone, were fully purchasing products, sharing ideas in several languages, all at the same time, and in more languages if you are more urban in a certain way. So in Durban, Zulu may dominate, but in Joburg, people could cross over the dominant languages, and everybody was familiar with Sesotho, which means Tswana, and everybody was familiar with Xhosa, Zulu, and then because of the apartheid policy system, everybody knew Afrikaans, and then everybody knew English because the Afrikaans was dominating because it had been doing its independence movement from English, right? There, so you have all these peculiar things because, you drink with people from the Transvaal who are black, and when they got really drunk, they kind of moved to Afrikaans. Which is to say, also Afrikaans is also a black language, right? Because it's kind of old and it's kind of this language that was made in a home of what were, slaves, workers, or people under the control of of the initial settlers, right? And that software of that language itself was larger than the arrival of the apartheid state, right? So all this complexity, you're starting to look at it, and it's kind of like messing your brain because you are completely convinced that you're an emissary to take education, knowledge, values, and enlightenment to those dark Africans in your own village or wherever, in all over Africa. And then if they work really hard, they can kind of end up becoming like you. And the assumption that is widespread today in Nigeria, Ghana, and pretty much everywhere around the continent is that this process is continuing and is continuous, and we still can't understand why they're refusing to accept this grammar. Okay? Now, so the debate on that radio was basically affirmative action. So there were all these callers coming, white callers mostly, coming from some black callers. Some black callers were like, but the accent. The black callers who are dedicated fans of SAB3, who would say were little Anglo assholes like myself at the time, were calling to say, we have been the few supporters of SAB3, and now you have these black journalists who have the wrong accent, and I use this thing for my child to learn English, the right accent, which is the white English South African accent. So you're like, okay, fine. Now already you're kind of thinking, coming from anywhere else, you're like, that kind of white English South African accent is kind of really ethnic. So if English is going to internationalize you, how, if you're doing a power move, how does this power move serve you forward somehow, right? Okay. But of course the debate was the policymaker at the SABC was like, no, actually what happens is this. The reality is, if a story is breaking, for the last 50 years, the black journalists can file a story in sometimes, often, bad English, Zulu, Xhosa, Afrikaans, Sesotho. So you're like, fire has exploded in such and such suburb of Joburg. That guy is on here and on here, filing all those parallel stories for the 1 o'clock news in 2 hours, right? But there was not a single white journalist inside, or majority of them, who couldn't even go to a township anyway, because the world will fall apart, okay? So the software of that pre-understanding was difficult. So automatically you're like, and I think this is kind of how Achille had approached the idea of the Afropolitan, is that the density of circulation, like inherently, urban or rural, the interactions you're building as software as an African pretty much anywhere, right, are insanely complex. So I can't transact. Kenya has a national language, we kind of can get along with it, but I can't emotionally transact my own country without an acute consciousness that if I'm in a public transport vehicle, there are between 7 and 14 languages in operation just in my radar. Right? And I have to be registering all of them in some sense, because what you're doing by being a cosmopolitan is you're acutely trying to be ambient to everything, not offend anything, relax into many things. So when somebody bursts out laughing in this kind of language, you can actually turn and be like, no, what's this? Or if some song breaks out, and the DJ of the whatever is also curating all that sound, right? So is it Sunday morning? Are they doing Kikuyu gospel? So if they're doing Kikuyu gospel, are there Luos who take that particular matatu from here to there, to there, to there, to there? So the thing of blackness folding into sort of these grand diasporic stories, which assumes that they're not even dense internal diasporas, that thing is a fallacy, yes? And it's a projection that is wrong and is nobody's priority. Okay. That it so happens, that Salman Rushdie is in New York and he's a New Yorker, is great. But is that what? Indian police? Do you know what I mean? Like what is that? Why is this? Why is there no such phenomenon generating out of India, right? Why is there no Igbopolitan?
Right.
Because they're bloody there in like Crete and the North Pole, trading and doing shit, right? Like why? Like there's just it's a very screwed up idea, and I think it has no grand sustainability except to examine, I think, in a certain way, a certain kind of partnership or a certain kind of elite language is using itself to close ranks. It really just feels like that to me. Yeah. And it's nice when you want to close ranks about like, shit, I buy my clothes in Ghana. And then when I'm in New York, I can be like, that clothes there, and then I got them cheap in Ghana. So, of course, there are all these like lovely and slightly crazy dynamics that one is doing to have play in Brooklyn. That's fine. It's cool. But it shouldn't be in a textbook. Yeah.
And with that, also thinking about the ways in which, just based on what you're saying, that the Afropolitan on some level still just ends up, I'm assuming, it ends up reproducing this notion of center and periphery, right? What makes you sort of cosmopolitan in this sort of African context, according to Afropolitan, is that you're not only in Africa, but you can also transact in Europe. You can also transact in France. You can also transact in the U.S. But it doesn't mean you can also transact in Kerala. You can also transact in Crete. You can also, as it would technically, or should, and that's when it begins to show the sort of cracks, right? In the rationale. It's interesting. It's something I want to come back to in a minute in sort of the structure, and we talked a lot about this yesterday, sort of the structure of how you're thinking about this. But I found you using two terms. One, software, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute, and also grammar, and thinking about how are they same, how are they different, what's the hardware, what's the software. But before we get to that, I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about your work with the founding of Kwani. There's a way in which I think Kwani occupies a really interesting place in this, where you may have found an effective way with that organization to kind of have it both ways, to have this sort of international transaction or transactability, while at the same time allowing artists to stay sort of attuned to these localities and local diaspora. So I just wondered if you could say more about that project and the founding of that project. Or maybe what the project is, because it occurred to me I didn't say that.
I think that, like, yesterday when we were talking, I remember saying how kind of jealous I am of the Black Lives Matter generation. Because I was like, when we were young, there was no political movement. And of course, like, that thing couldn't stand scrutiny because it was a political movement, right? And what had just happened is we were coming off, many countries on the continent have been coming off these one-party style dictatorships through the 90s. And in that build-up to 2000, in Kenya, between 1997 and 2012, there was this sort of slow releases of imagination, I'd call it. So shit was dry, you know? Me, what I call myself is like what we were, the people in their 40s, we are like IMF generation. And IMF generation was watching whatever small middle class there was implode when the IMF conditionalities arrived. So you watched your parents who were just about to retire or looming or you are about to go to university. You watched the income fall apart. You watched interest rates hit 35%. So that the little thing they were finishing to build to go and retire now fell apart. So it fell apart and they lost it, right? Mm-hmm. And so even when they're shipping, so people are having gatherings, for example, to say, we spent 2 years to send George, Jane, Peter, Alice abroad. And then so languages like I-20 became like critical. And they're going abroad was actually really a saving grace now for the family. It wasn't even the thing of going to study abroad, right? It was really like so that $30 a week can come to Western Union for milk in the house. Like those were not questions that were ever being asked to the people in the civil service or teachers. They just never encountered such a situation, right? And it finished. Or to watch the university system. So since independence, basically our system was free, grants, and you pay back the loan. And there was an institution where you sign, and then when you get your job, you pay it over 10 years, and so on and so forth. Still functional in some degree. But the IMF conditionalities were like, no, you privatize you pay. So I left for South Africa partly because of that, right? I was already in university, and I was like, okay, actually what will actually pay to go to public university is less than what I'll pay in a South African university. And me, and also in my head, I was like, South Africa has morals. Kenya has only one. So I'm like, I'm off, I'm gone, it's abroad, But so I'm just trying to give a background context to how kind of this, the kind of the oxygen buildup of this thing. Mm-hmm. So of course you go to South Africa and there's this explosion. I mean, you're sitting there and you're like, just looking at all this, like, you're in a dorm and you're seeing grown-ups, which is to say academics. Mm-hmm. You're seeing workers who work for the university you're in, and students marching together to take down apartheid or, bring the change. Mm-hmm. And you're like, these 18-year-olds are carrying this thing, right? Mm. Someone once told me, a South African was brought up in Soweto once told me, the people you don't mess with, like in Joburg, there are all these gangs, right? And so, like they're the jackrollers, they do terrible things. We can't even start, right? But nobody in Johannesburg, because of the history of the culture of the students of 1976, if you wanted to mess with someone in Soweto, mess with high school students, right? This is like the level of militancy that thing was. I mean, that some gangster has gone and somebody's sister or whatever has been killed, raped, or whatever, right? Like they clear out your archive. They'll finish your family, the other family. Cops will come. Nobody will stop them, right? And nobody will stop their sense of what they're carrying in this public domain as being the front line of how this place is going to be made ungovernable if rights don't arrive. So now in Kenya, where like me, I was like, I participated in a strike once where we went to invade the maize field and roasted maize and then made a half-hearted attempt. I'm sorry to say this because I'm sure there are vegetarians here, and so there's a trigger warning. We killed a pig, and then because we had this headmaster, we had started a pig farm. And he was like, so we'll get nice proteins and then we'll be having a feast. So he called it Pokomiro. So he's like, soon we are going to have the Pokomiro and we shall eat pork. Now, if you know how protein-starved Kenyan boarding school students are, the caterers used to tell us, dietitians have said if you have a piece of meat the size of a matchbox every week, that is all you need. And she used to tell us this every day, right? So that pig, man, I only got a bit. And you kind of raw. That's the best tasting pig I've ever eaten in my life. So that was my political moment, and that was it. So inside your body, like something for me, and for many of us, your kind of like your bone structure is shifting without you realizing, because you're inside this noise and the impossibility, like Mandela is released, you're there, and then like stuff happens, then you're like, okay, it's gonna burn, it's gonna blow, it's gonna blow. You see these black people, they should stop doing all this politics. If they just keep quiet, there's all this thing. Right. All the expatriate Africans are just like, these people are challenging too much. Oh, no. You have to keep things sane. They should think about investment. That was the conversation that was going on in my uncle's house and whatever about all these things. But if you see the seismic moments, how they crashed, how the Bantustans, the fake nation states, 8 fell apart like in 3 weeks. If you saw how the police force of Bophuthatswana took down their own dictator, like when the people rebelled and he had said, we are staying independent, I'm with the apartheid government, right? Overnight, the right-wing AWB came in with guns and pickups to shoot black people in Bophuthatswana, and I saw a Bophuthatswana policeman, which is to say a policeman effectively for the apartheid state, within the state, a loyalist. This guy is shooting at black people on the side of the road, and this guy just comes to this man and shoots, pop, pop, pop. 1, 2, I think there were 3 people, but I think for sure one guy died. And then you see the pickups of the right wing, who are the kind of part of the military complex. They are all the military people who've been putting down black people for like millennia, or hundreds of years. You saw the pickups turn around and run away. So now when you come back to Kenya, so I come back to Kenya after my mom dies, the oxygen is still tight, but there's this looming election. Moi has said, okay, I'm going to go. No one believes he's going to go until the day he goes. And people throw mud at the guy, right? On the stage. And then the hip-hop guys, so the first people basically, the middle class is always last. Yeah? People on the wrong side, always, right? The middle class basically, if the African middle class, I'm sorry, I'm going to put this shit down just directly. The African middle class, as far as they're concerned, if Queen Victoria came back, it's fine. But they won't say it, right? They just won't. Like they're like, well, Afrocentric, whatever, but that's the deal, right? So the hip-hop guys had started recording their own stuff. And now, when you come to talk about self-publishing, of course that was what it was, right? So you're like, wait, you mean, so, these kids came from this forgotten neighborhood called Dandora, near what is now the largest dump site for garbage in Nairobi. And were rapping in Sheng, which is kind of Nairobi's Creole. And you're just like, cause like, you just feel like, man, this is amazing, this is terrifying, this is crazy, but it's self-published. So now there's no publisher. They're coming up on stage. Little tapes are passing around everywhere. DVD, CD, videos are being made by them independently, and all this thing is happening. And you're like, and us guys sit in little committee meetings, and we're like, I don't know, the publishers are always oppressing us.
How do we get them to look at us?
So it's been that thing. I've been sending simultaneous submissions to America. You're like, no. So that, with the first meetings we had when I won the Kane Prize, were at someone's house called Alisa Zaidi, and we were meeting in this garden. In his garden, drinking beer and talking and whatever. And there was just this kind of energy. What happens is, there's no Facebook, but people have kind of come out of their little closets. They're like, well, I'm an accountant and I write poetry sometimes. There was all this shyness, right? So people are like, I've heard if you go there on Sundays. So people just came out, right? And that lack of oxygen inside there, when you just throw like a droplet, it goes boom. I mean, we put together content, I don't even know. It's like now I'm just like, you can't remember the work. Time became just squished like this, and you are in a tunnel, And then you are watching Yvonne winning the Kane Prize next year, and then people are throwing money at you, and then people were like, with the first Nairobi Book Fair, we presented Kwani, 700 books sold that day, right? So you're like, so from there now the whole idea became easy. And we were like, no one even could imagine digital publishing at the time, but we released the first Kwani actually on PDF.
Really?
Because we wanted to enter 4 short stories for the Kane Prize by the deadline, and we didn't have any money to print. So we had already technically known from the previous Kane Prize that it has to be published. So we're like, what does published mean, right? So we put it in a PDF and then we sent it. And we posted 12 copies because they needed 12 copies of the printed PDF. Just so you see, it's printed. So it's published.
And it's exactly
so what are you going to do? Yeah. And then she won with it, right? Yeah.
I had a question. I was wondering if you felt that the way the West writes about Africa has shifted since the publication of your essay, How to Write About Africa.
Okay, no, of course not. Okay, my kind of sense about the How to Write About Africa thing is that, it's not about consciousness raising. So, if for a certain purpose, by default, the initial sort of explosion of people sending How to Write About Africa to each other when it came out in Granta, it was basically an African student at Amherst, someone who works with 4 white people somewhere in the world, and there are all these sorts of questions that will be like, now, I don't even know where to start. So this thing summarized what they knew already, and they could send it to their friends, to deliver it to said Western place, and so on and so forth. So I think that was its virality, yes? Now, the thing kind of hit that big, bleeding sponge of compassion power called liberal. So, and that thing is the most diabolical force of the universe. That thing you go with ninja swords and everything else, just like, do you want some Earl Grey tea? And you can't fight that thing. Well, presumably, while it still rules the world, which it does. So it did nice moments. I met the president of Germany. He said, I have called you. I love Africa. I have used a quote from, that kind of thing. And then people doing things like, what can we do? Not. So, no. Until there's power, until you have power in the world, until the continent, its diaspora, have power over fate, and power in every way that thing is looked for, it's not going to shift at all. So what happens is that you throw a landmine and then the kind of sponge squeeze thing squeezes more tears out, and you get a little grant.
Right.
Or a prize or something, That's, it's... So, the construction of the appeal.
Thinking about that and sort of thinking about... thinking about the text, in this case an essay, that does go viral. And it's interesting, I think you really had a sort of viral moment. It was prior to that moment, before we had that language for thinking about how it was transacting, because it was kind of pre the big digital moment, right? It was still a print object that really sort of circulated really heavily.
But it was...
Yeah.
It had come out in print already, but they had just launched their website.
But it was brand
So they put one story up on free for people.
Exactly. But it was pre-social media.
Yes,
it was still pre-social media. But what it gave us, I think, or gives us thinking back, a sort of insight into... One of the things I'm interested always in are sort of the mechanics of social media, right? Things aren't just moving so fast, and it's not just happening because it's electronic. These things are happening because what's happening in this electronic media was always kind of viral, but now the reach is even greater, right? But there's always a sense of certain kinds of text that got transacted more than others, right? But something you said that I think is really interesting in that is sort of, even when you produce a thing that can be, educational or a wake-up call or, anything, what do you think happens to sort of power in that, right? I mean, what happens to the power individual? What happens to sort of you as a writer, right? Is that the moment of your power, or does it become the moment of like your essay's power? Do you see what I mean? And you would think that technically those would be the same thing. But I do wonder, I think there's a lot, even like in today's world of thinking about memes, and the ways in which people produce these sort of cultural, sort of crystallized picture, kind of picture or sound moments that people exchange, and they can have a great impact or really, make a moment make sense, all kinds of different people. But the author disappears. Like you never stop and say, oh, that's the guy who produced the best meme, the world-changing meme. Like, can you identify any person besides yourself who's produced a meme that you've seen? You see them getting at, right? There was even a moment where people tried to put little kind of digital watermarks on memes, and people would just kind of like erase them, right? Because it seemed like the definition of the meme meant that it had no attribution, right? So I was wondering if you could say a bit about not so much the big question, if you want, of sort of larger transformations, but really thinking about the digital and thinking about, on the one hand, I'm thinking about Kwame, there's so much positive, of course, that comes out in using the digital to get your work out there more, get people's stuff out there more, to self-publish. But at the same time, I'm thinking even of the mixtape, all the other kinds of infrastructure work that has to happen to make sure that those tapes are still attached to artists, which is a fancy way of saying you can produce the dope mixtape, that mixtape gets passed on, respliced, sent around, right? But then who gets paid?
Yeah.
Let me just summarize.
Yeah, so that from day one, and was, I mean, the crisis of, because of course what was happening is, we had, let's put it like this, that it weirdly, whatever has happened since 2008, it kind of like seems like ancient history to remember what happy neoliberals we all were. I was the happiest neoliberal in the world. I was just like, well, the problem is publishing. It's not been doing its marketing properly, and so we are going to do it different. We're going to say, we're going to have an issue, for example, on Buruburu. So a whole Kwani issue on Buruburu. So when Buruburu was at some point the largest sort of middle-class housing project on the continent, right? It's the 70s. And so you're like, now Buruburu in a certain sense is a kind of little Kenya. So we'll get advertisers from Buruburu. When you locate, because me, I'm like this thing of trying to locate Kenya in the ether, I don't know. But if you go to Buruburu, it radiates out to all of Kenya. We are interested in the urban thing. Me, I can't even want to know. It's not that it's not rural, but like, man, nothing is too far. We are inside this urban space, so we're going to do an entire Buru issue, And now once that happens, you sort of build deep into a whole set of complex emotions and duties. And then now, because what happens is everybody looks for sponsorship in an uncommitted thing called Kenya nation state. So people are like, okay, I want to do a concert. I go to Safaricom, I go to Nation Media Group, I go to these sorts of places that they just hover, but they're not, But Buruburu has businesses, has owners, has saloons, has everything. So when you have all this stuff, so that was the idea. Then there's, of course, how the grant system works, which starts to orient you in one direction. Then there's also the orientation of the fashions of what people want to write about, which are always also a little bit distorted. So there's something of like, we are all consuming what all these Anglo-Indian writers are kind of exploding in the world, and you're like, there's a way to brown myself into the center somehow, and you're not doing it consciously. We are all kind of inside those conversations, right? So there was the mix, but for me, first the whole thing was to just curate, to have a sort of mashed up everythingness of. We were publishing stuff in Sheng. I was like, look, every piece of poetry, I don't even know how to read poetry, but every piece of poetry that people are sending me is so overwrought with Victorianness, right? Or some version of something I can't understand. Afro-authenticity, but just slogan at the same time. But I'm like, Sheng, guys are making up this language of our times, this digital language. It's happening all in Sheng. And when you start seeing the kids in the most expensive private schools, like, have in the 2000s, accents were shed. British accents disappeared from kids, right? Because they want, and you ever see like little white kids and everything else needing that piece of play. It was just, what power moves that was making were unambiguously clear and were making a moment, right? So that thing and that idea and that sound itself started to dominate and also started to de-Victorianize our sense of ourselves too in the making. Now, to monetize was the crisis from the beginning. So I remember we went to try. So I got 100,000 bob of advertisers by cold calling and bullying, which I discovered in that moment. And I was a very sweet boy before that I could do well.
Wait, this works. This is what.
Yes. But it comes to a kind of a certain kind of end. Sponsorship essentially in Kenya really is about how middle management can impress the CEO. It has nothing to do with shareholder value or whatever. But in Kenya, the CEO is this patriarch of all things. And if you can inhale their inner desires or trying to impress them, you get millions. But this thing of like, is it important or it doesn't count. And you learn that very quickly. The sort of fakeness of the facade of pretending that there's these sorts of value systems. And I was very stubborn with them. I'd been told by people, Antonia Chimurenga was like, Binyavanga, why do you pursue these things? I was like, I believe inside there's honor behind the wall. No, there isn't. So, so we knew we wanted to have there's a time we were like, we're going to go to universities, we're going to get cool backpacks. And we give a guy a bunch of Kwani products, right? And so they set up a business with a huge commission. And it's kind of cool, and there are all these sort of side products that they have inside this thing. So that was the idea. But now, the people who give grants, like Ford Foundation, were like, that's exciting, but the word marketing does not exist in their language. So if you say gender queer outreach, yes. But now how do you merge that with a business thing? I'm not quite sure. Then now when you go to all those cool best friends of yours who went to high school with, who are now working for places that can seed it as an investment, they're like, we just like you for writing. So that was how that was playing out. By early on, we got into a project with Transition at the time and Chimurenga, and the idea was to digitize all our archives and going forward, and it was called Gunj. Mike Vasquez came up with that. We went to Nairobi, we gathered a lot of funding, we were going to do it scanned in India, and now that was supposed to be this database that we were going to build, while it was clear that awaiting what monetization will mean of an archive, right? And we are already kind of aware of how prices of content will be different and everything else. All that, because of course everyone was discussing the amazing future at the moment the internet arrived. So those things were always in our mind, but there were simply not enough examples for you to commit to, And the Gunj thing kind of imploded, somehow one of the people who had run away with it had a breakdown, very Afropolitan breakdown. And so he was, I can't. So then the whole thing fell apart in Boston, in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So that was the end of Gunj.
That's really too bad.
Yeah. So all those things are now active. And so, what I was telling you yesterday, we're trying to do Nani, which is a digital publishing house, and me as a great consumer of high-level romance trash all my life, I'm like, I'm going to make my dream publishing house, which is the romance that I want, that every woman in Africa must want, because I'm saying so, something like this. So, so that's what so we are trying to learn, our group is trying to learn, there's a lot already we learned about how you feel you can make such a thing work. Because what has happened is, over these 10 years, the people you've networked with and worked with are basically the entire production space of new writing on the continent in English. So there's a lot of kind of inside software inside there. And when you asked me the specific question of how do you get paid, my whole idea is we want 50 to 100 writers who are paid salaries. Because it comes back again to that Afropolitan thing. I don't know how to, a low expectation. So Niger alone, like, just Lagos. How many people in Lagos will be prepared to pay $3 to read all the romance that they want if it's greatly produced, but that you can make as many as people want? So if someone was budgeting for a Mills and Boon, which is 187 pages, as one a day, right? It's just now a matter of economies of scale, amounts of content, and being extremely acutely aware as you are able to now, which you were never able to before. You can monitor each and all at the same time, and be amending as you need. You know, you have the kind of situation where you can be handling mass data, mass text, and subdividing and tagging and discovering new tags and growing new niches, and then amending and saying, oh my God, you know, the thing is like, the sex has been too light, or look, bisexual is exploding.
And after that tagging also that your audiences are helping develop.
Yes,
what they're being given, which is amazing to think about.
So we're in this process now of looking for formulas of building the prototype and testing, and then hiring an initial batch of writers and working through processes. So we just want a huge bank of content in the next 5 years, and then we see. I think it's a key thing for the idea of literature that you have the pulp that feeds everything else. You know, like the pulp that creates a marketplace. So, and also the ability for people who are emotionally committed, you know, because writing is like a virus. It's just this thing you find yourself with, and you're like, damn, man, like you can't take antibiotics. So you're like, all those people who have high viral load, you're like, okay, how do we entrap you? And then give you a salary, so that way you write all this crap for us, and then you have 4 months free to go and become Proust. Something like that. That's it.
Absolutely. Absolutely, that's engaging.
You mentioned queerness, and in Black Sexualities, we have a unit thinking about queerness and visibility in Africa. And so I'm interested in how has your publishing life and your public life changed, or has it changed since coming out online as a writer?
I'm more interested in sci-fi. I mean, it's a funny way. It had been hovering. I was a sci-fi reader at some point, but something about, I don't know, it turns out even what had been happening is, around the week that I came out, this guy in New York, or somebody who's called Makido Sad, who happens to be a young Nigerian, recently moved to Brooklyn, hating it, was like, I have a friend, and he's gay, and he writes these sort of allegories in sci-fi about future Lagos online in this blog. So I go and look inside, and I'm like, you know, I don't know, the love, there's a certain kind of love you have as a publisher, but you're not really a publisher, you're also a writer, that was like, I'm going to be infatuated with that guy because I want to write that. Right. You know, like this part of me is like, I have to find my inner that guy doing that. So there's something like that going on. I'd say that the skill I have, of course, what there are many forces, internal and external, that want to kind of like go and say, paint you the color of a graven image and then take a pension. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you go around and say, I'm the ambassador of homosexuality and freedom in whatever, like, they're like, what color do you want the money that we give you? And then you just stand on a podium and then, like, you know.
A grant. Yeah.
you on a horse or something, you know. So there are those, but I mean, the good thing, I mean, the thing is, there's so many things you're invested in, and there are all these archives that just, you know, even that's from all the things you've published or dealt with, or the networks or whatever, they're very demanding. They're like, okay, so I know you're busy there, Celebi, Binyavanga, but remember you're supposed to be reading this thing that you said you're going to read. And remember, like, when you came to Lagos, we gave you a home and you stayed there and you discovered all the literature of everything else, and now you're not been inspiring my Facebook. So, you know, she gets real very quickly in that sense. So I really am interested in looking for queer work. I'm not quite sure what that means, yes? So it's a random looking, right? At the workshop we do in Nigeria, increasingly number of actual queer people have materialized. And so I've never been known, because it's kind of awkward to ask, because sometimes you know and you don't know, or you're not supposed to know, or you're told quite explicitly, but you're also instructed silently to say nothing about it. So there are all these sorts of dynamics going on. And so it became clear to me that, for example, a lot of writers are queer, but are writing extremely straight, very, very straight lives with very subterranean things going on. So people want now this social space to examine, and as more people kind of pop in with the subject matter in some interesting way, some of them are now weighing in, or coming in to weigh in. But even then, I'm completely cool with the idea of this young dummy who writes. It's really incredible. Texture of future Lagos, yes, which itself is its sense of ungovernedness from Lagos's Victorianness, of course, is a very queer response to, whatever. So it's not to predetermine somehow how this thing should come out, because what's happening is, of course, there are a lot of anthologies and call-outs, and there's a lot of funding now for queer writing, even African queer writing, and validating experience, and that's all beautiful. And so I'm kind of trying to look for ways to think about and love new work, and ways to help seed and provoke new work. Because on the continent, the problem of language, the problem of it is not to say that there is no language. I mean, pretty much like the lesbians of Township, South Africa, you sit down with them and there's no shortage of language, right? Mm-hmm. But first, that language itself is not being transmitted to a larger queer world as a social enterprise and an aesthetic way of building a sort of I'm not going to say community building, but of
people on the ground.
Oh shit, yeah. When I go there, I want to do that. A certain kind of animated, exciting way to want to look into imagining yourself inside a space and deriving that from it, and then getting excited by how that space is taking off in its way of imagining itself, and you beginning to imagine yourself. So these sorts of things are the directions I'm really interested in going to, and I'm now sort of slowly getting the software to deal with. Yeah.
So just to come back to Marissa's earlier question about terms that you use, software, and software and archives. These are terms that seem to have a particular importance in how you articulate your different publishing visions. Mm-hmm. And could you say a little bit more about, thinking about software, thinking about archives in this contemporary moment, how has that impacted your vision in publishing?
So the word, I didn't even know that word archive. It's, Tone Jabe is this guy who, he's not like me, but we met, and they're very kind of, I think a very important moment. I think that there's a certain way that parts of South Africa have become a new Pan-African metropole. You see what I mean? Because these sorts of explosions of the meetings in Harlem and London and Paris and whatever they meant to blackness and Africanness, in our season, Cape Town and Joburg were just as big. This sort of escape of people from dry, bored, kind of like dictatorship countries into South Africa, pre and post the release of Mandela. That sense of enthusiasm, like the African Americans all over Cape Town, from 91, 92, you were like, I'm done. Or Caribbeans were like, oh, it's here. That feeling, a volunteer, not even whatever. But Ntone came from Cameroon to be a basketball coach. Mm-hmm. And then, so there were very important seminal moments. So when Sandile Dikene, who was a returned poet from I think he had been in Germany, very well known in sort of the anti-apartheid struggle, came and was made the arts editor of the Cape Times, which was it's not really New York Times, it was like the Boston Post, Cape Townia, kind of high white Cape Town newspaper, So they were like, the ballet, that was that newspaper. So, and then he's like, no more ballet reviews, right? Now, there are more, Cape Town is the most liberal white city, but it's the one that will go insane when it doesn't understand. Because then they've just been like, oh, well, transformation really means that we're going to take one child out of every township and then she'll become a ballerina. That's it, right? That was what their whole thing was going to be. And so he said no. And so he finds Ntone, this writer, he walks into, I have a little bar, and then they drink all this whiskey and they don't pay for it. And then he's like, I want you to write for us. Those moments were critical. So we were just talking about what's going to happen, right? And stuff was taking off, and there was no one just like positioning, just sending stuff in and like, okay, that's me. And then you send it, and then you are sending it, and someone, like, white South Africa was doing this thing where they're like, when you put a black South African thing in front of them, they're like, I can hear something, but I don't know what. But they can see you. Do you understand? Like, so you're kind of pretending not to notice, but you're noticing, but you're not noticing. Mm-hmm. But what's happening is a certain sense that when you say something black coming from you in a certain way, there is no political threat in their office coming from you, and then you're being published. So there are all these kinds of cycles going on like that. And so Sandile was carrying them, and he was bringing different kinds of cosmopolitanisms in there. And so Ntone is the one who told me about the word archive. Because he's Cameroonian, and they're Jesuit mafias, and they speak French. So they know those things. They were like, the archive, it has to be deconstructed. So they had an issue called archive. So you're like, it's that cool, it's too cool. So it enters your software, you're like, if you drop the word, you guys are like, oh, they... Anyway, so... Now, it's just kind of normal. I think, but I appreciate that. I mean, that transition from... into this kind of machining. Mm-hmm. It's something, I realize I've been using it. When I started writing, it was when it was excite.com. And there was a website called Pure Fiction. I was like the first 7 people online saying I'm trying to be a writer, really, in the world. Mm-hmm. If you do algorithm, you'll find. I did just know that I was, if you don't know what I mean. Mm-hmm. But now, so, I started writing for G21. There was this guy he died in New Orleans. And it was one of the first e-magazines in the world. And it was called G21. And he was called Rod Ames. So I'm in Cape Town, I think, those days photos were not online, really. Actually, it's kind of this white guy, and then he's international. I couldn't understand what it was, but I was like, he pays $100 to anybody who writes anything from the world they come from. Wow. So you could be like, you just send a piece, if it's 800 words, he does a light edit and he pays, Mm-hmm. So for me, that money and that legitimacy, because the moment I send it, he's like, you're like a writer. Mm-hmm. That thing was so important to all of this thing. That story published there is the one that won the Kane Prize. Now, so when the guy falls sick, after winning the Kane Prize, he sends this bulletin out to his writers, and he's like, guys, I kind of can't pay you anymore because I'm not well. Da, 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 da. And then he's like, because I'm doing 3 jobs to pay you. So basically this guy was living in New Orleans, and he had all this kind of, we're going to make the world better. He's like 50-something, and he's working these jobs, and he publishes 13 pieces, that's $1,300, and that's a week. The work is done that month. Right? Yeah. So, yeah. So, I don't know, the tributes to these kinds of wild adventuring that people were up to then, man, were really key to things, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I was saying, so in machining language, the first short story I ever wrote, which is being removed from all archives, but I had this idea, I was like, what if there was this moment of convergence at the moment that there's all pre-millennial angst. Mm-hmm. The millennium hits, and then there's this convergence, and then Lucy of Ethiopia somehow comes into this convergence because we are living in the great age of that thing.
She's on Facebook and things.
Yes. So this was I was fevered with that idea for like a year. I was just like, and then I make the novel. What's going to happen? So yeah, it was there.
Can I ask? I'm thinking, and I just have to because I'm a big nerd and I'm okay with it. I think we do have to pick up some of this language explicitly. I'm thinking of how the languages you're using. I'll be more clear in a moment, but I'm thinking about how the languages you're using tend to be attached to certain very specific discourses, but that you're using them across discourse. And I'm thinking about across structures, and I'm thinking how on some level, in my feeling of what you're saying, my response to what you're saying, that the ways in which you're shifting these languages across discourses really also reveals something important about sort of a tension between the local and the global, right? In all of your work and what you're talking about. And like the ways in which on the one hand you'll say, between lesbians in this township in South Africa, there's this language, but it's their language. And it defines existence on the ground, but what does it mean to connect that language to a larger sphere of like queer communities across the world, and so on, right? But the words I was hearing, and I will be more explicit, is, and when I'm thinking about this crossing register. So for instance, when you're talking about like gangs in Joburg, you're like, oh, they'll erase your whole archive. I mean, they'll kill your whole family. Do you see what I mean? So, and just to be clear, like thinking erase your archive just means like clicking your computer and like getting rid of like your library, but you're talking about people's lives.
Yes.
But it works, but you see what I'm saying?
Yes.
And it's more than people's lives, because it's people's lives and the meaningfulness of those lives in communities as well. I'm thinking about even all the ways now, which is a big debate, like the worst thing you can do to someone now, it isn't just, let them die. So let them die and make them disappear. If you're thinking politically, right? Or unfriend them, right? But it's a difference between like, killing and disappearing someone. You see what I mean? Or someone dying versus being disappeared. Right? So you said that. And then earlier, thinking about people's communication, you keep using this, or thinking about people's communication, particularly in terms of local languages, set against, a sort of larger global world of comprehension. You keep saying software. Right?
Yes.
And now you keep saying like the machine that could. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that. Is this just something that's leaked over time because you're so, I know from our previous conversations, you're just so embedded in these worlds where figuring out how to make the digital work for people on the ground, but also to make those grounds bigger.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
But also, so is it just like a leakage? Or do you see structures that actually this digital language is making more comprehensible for you or makes sense for you?
It was interesting yesterday when you said to me about this whole thing of how you said like the making concrete of. So of course, like there's that part that you can feel wanting to be sealed off to move, right? So I feel even like part of this, one of the debates of Africa Rising or whatever, which is not about economy, is like, so for my generation, they're just like, shit just wasn't moving. So if you put, and I've actually said this, and I found, because there's a part of it that's visceral, right? You're like, okay, so now the rubber band is holding you, and then like international capital just fell, and then you're like, pew! And like, to me, I'm like, you know what? So all this fixing, blah blah blah. When you see the shit on the other side, like, which is to say above water somehow and breathing, then let's now have a conversation about the subtlety. So of course that is a political moment too, right? Now in terms of the deleting of the archive is now, how do you start to prepare yourself? So you are a sentimental person, right? You're a sentimental person in this place, in a political royal, which is how you're reading it, right? And people there are reading it like all the necessary violences that must take place to get to that, to get to a constitution, right? So now, so right then and now, there's this whole idea of ungoverned crime. Yes? So, But then you also have the idea of children of 1976. Then you have the idea of you're watching the cost because you're in class with the children of 1976, right? And part of the problem that has happened is since 1976, people are like, I ain't showing up. Like, what are you going to do, teacher? Yes? So there's all this thing going on, right? But there's nothing else but to start to position your imagination to understand the vehicle or to inhabit the vehicle that's moving. And so to now, on one hand, to not name what the cost of these violences are is a problem, but the liberal project itself, right, wants to make it the political point. Right. You see? So so there's all that bypassing. So of course me, as the liberal project in South Africa, I was sitting with those South Africans and say, you see you people, this is what happened. Even us, you understand? So all this conversation you're having with them is like, I don't understand. As you have been doing this independence thing for 42 years, I'm telling you, it's just not that easy. And so when you just allow your children not to pass exam, do you know what the African middle class, the word exam? Exam. Examination.
Right.
So we are there. I mean, the African expatriates are already there as this kind of elite that whiteness needs, but that, you see, global capital is kind of ruthless. There's a certain aspect of global capital that was already told white South Africa, okay, there's some shit you guys can't do. Okay? And then, and in the exam. And then there are these people who are somehow transnationalized because of coup and whatever, and transmigration, and they can. And then there are these little things called opening marketplace niches, which you guys, if you pitch up at your opening marketplace niche, people are going to stone you. Because all those new niches, like black incomes in South Africa had been growing for like 25 years, long before this whole, like the writing on that wall about a Cadbury chocolate needing to get to that person, there was no white person left to take a Cadbury chocolate to.
Right.
And there was no white person who was going to take a Cadbury chocolate to that township left now.
Right. But the chocolates need to get there.
But the chocolates need to get there. And so maybe the strategy would be get a convenient Ghanaian or a Binyavanga and then give him a Zulu-speaking assistant so he can get there. Because that Zulu-speaking assistant is, of course, like the problem, right? Because if I'm going to make this deal with if white capital in South Africa is going to make this deal with global capitalism to say enough is enough, it's not moral, it's money, that guy is going to cut my head off and kill me anyway. So I need a safety net, and so we have to be constructed as this safety net. And Binyavanga will turn up and say, I passed that exam. I really, I've done due diligence here, Amherst, it's all there. Yeah. So, yeah. So, now, I don't know, I think, like, there's a certain sense in which, like, what is kind of amazing is, I don't know how it may be, because I don't know this, I'm not an academic, but like other economies themselves and their presidencies, they immediately start to take kind of using those pipelines. So to me, if all those things are the machine, the software in a iPod or all those machines, and then the hardwares and the pipes that are going through, is of course what populates them. Of course, is in many ways controlled by structures beyond anything else, but they can get infected with things that are, and different kinds of economies trying to make themselves up inside the sandwich. I'm not sure, and we were talking about this last night, that of course it's still a parody of the power relationships that are already existing, right? But like, it feels that in some ways there are places that the idea of recognition of power has shifted, so that you're like, Arab Spring, which was like, this thing crumbles, and you're like, where? So moments or little potholes arrive, and then now you're like, oh, it's a portal to a new universe, and it's a portal that just leads back to the same place, kind of like. So, but all this time, I think human beings are also learning incredibly fast how to negotiate such things, right? And how to play them out, and so I don't know. It feels like even coming back to the idea of the Afropolitan, for example. For me, the biggest feature with the writing community is that the networks that were made, the arrival of Facebook was insanely important. Yeah. So Nigeria, Kenya, Uganda, that network, this generation of young writers fly. They were just at the Writivism in Uganda. So you're like, you save money as the nurse, doctor, and you're there to meet other writers and do anthologies together and whatever. So you have these internal networks and niches where people are doing their MFA between themselves, where people are self-publishing, they're making magazines between themselves, and there are things now I don't even know the level of. Yeah. And I have arrived at a point where my generation, people were like, Google was wrong, African languages shall die. Jalada. These children were born the other day. I don't even know. Twitter was probably there when they were born. And they've done an African languages issue. And they put a call out across the continent and the diaspora. And I don't even know who did all those translations and everything else. And so, it's not a medium, right? But now all these sorts of ideas that people are making and fighting for all this time in a certain way, just kind of something amazing that this sort of thing is possible. When I met Gugi, it was over 10 years ago, and he was like, I need to do an anthology of 4 languages and in parallel translation with each other. Okay, they didn't do that, right? But to imagine how much heavy lifting it seemed to have 20 years ago. So if you throw desire, you're like, there are these, you're like, I'm testing nodes of desire. I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm just sitting, which sometimes what cruising Facebook is, right? It's like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm just testing nodes of desire. I'm just like, nothing. Then you're like, oh, okay, I can tunnel in there. I can tunnel in there. Now, even in where do you go to examine, to start to build an internal language for sexuality, right? So me, I was on nifty.org for the longest time, but I was like, where are the black people? I don't know where the black people are. There's no African. There's nowhere.
Can we just say a little bit about Nifty? That's so interesting. You talk about Nifty. Nifty is an erotic archive.
Yes.
Which I don't know if it still exists.
Yes, very much.
Yeah, but Nifty.
I'm a life member.
Yeah, no, for real. And Nifty has been around since the early 90s.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's okay. I just wanted to clarify that. It's because it's really fascinating in terms of thinking about archives in this way.
Yes. So, there are all these places to negotiate. Then, there was a guy called Huboy who had an escort review site that was completely amateur with no ads. So all those days, for years, I could fantasize and say, okay, so now the perfect thing is going to be I'm going to save money when I get some money. I'm going to get some money, and then I'm going to hire experts. People with PhDs, track record, 10-year track, male escorts. So I was like, when it's ready and there's budget, there's a hotel room. So you learn how you're negotiating all these things. You're like, I've wasted too much time. And if you calculate how many dates I've missed, all that time, really, if it's going to cost me $300, I'm like, fine. So I'm like, am I confident enough to do a real porn star? No, you want to go light first. But now, this guy, what's happened is every city in the world has been tagged, right? And people have come in the amateur way and say, oh, he's really good with people who really don't know. Or he's like, I was in the closet. I didn't know. No. So you've already built that software of okay. So when I'm in London one day, when I'm in whatever, I built these lists, So that was my sex life for the longest time. It was this sort of imaginary space, right? And then Huboy went and died, right? The people you need to say thank you to in the world. And that, the thing hasn't been recreated, but for 5 years. So my coming out to myself was just happening with escorts in different countries. I'm like, if you're going to benefit from being an African writer, no, I'm going to pay you royalties, but you get tickets to cosmopolitan cities or in a hotel room, in a per diem. This could be a sexual liberation.
No, about that.
The other side of capital.
So the guys who've invited you are just like, well, would you like a late night biscuit? You're like, no. No. I have a deadline. I'm going up.
Fantastic.
So that's a hilarious place to stop. But I'm thinking I want a little bit of time. Oh, goodness. Yeah, we need a little bit of time to talk to the audience a little bit for questions. And I think we might still have more questions, but we'll make sure people had an opportunity to sort of speak if they wanted to. And we have a microphone here. This is good because it makes sure, as you can tell, it doesn't project out that way, but projects into the cameras, which is what we need. So thoughts, questions, comments from you guys? And there's a lot of conversations. It's like, you must take it in, synthesize, and then like photosynthesize.
Oh, hi, I'm Alexis T. Just want to say thank you so much for coming. And I remember for Africa as a country, you had this small piece on memorializing. So I've just been wondering, thinking back to the conversations on the archive and what that means in these new spaces. So consistently, there are different kinds of traumas. So we've talked about colonialism and slavery and apartheid in South Africa, but there's still different cases, Marikana, the massacres in Kenya.
Yes.
How do we work within this digital space and then remember these lost bodies, like in as much as the digital space like is incorporeal, like how do we insert them back into the spaces?
Yeah, there've been they've been really interesting, I was going to say that's spontaneous thing, or crowdsourced the archiving. I think with Garissa in Kenya, for example, that thing of archiving the names of all the students who died and calling out and then seeking permission, so this sort of vetted system that happened with all this kind of volunteerism was critical. I feel like similar sorts of forces itself happened with the Marikana question. And
Could you say what that is?
Sorry?
Could you say what that is that you're referring to?
Oh, sorry. The Garissa massacre by Al-Shabaab in Kenya. The 147. And I think that was the hashtag, something 147, right? Then after this last election, there was a group of poets, a new inquiry who had done, what was it? It's this kind of poetry string. You see what I mean? Which itself, there was a certain way that I think it impacted Kenyans and Africans in different spaces within our internal diaspora, our internal spaces, but it seems to take on a different kind of resonance in writers' communities and readers' communities. I'm guessing. Right? It's just a guess. There are things, of course, that you do preemptively. So, me, myself, like, when I was still editing Kwani, and I haven't for a very, very long time, my bent was fiction. We were commissioning a lot of non-fiction, but I was just like, well, it's like a long road to then us to do fiction. But Billy, I think, as the editor of Kwani, really built, for post-election violence, we had a double issue, and he had, for the election, an entire team of writers all over the country. And because the media itself wasn't even saying anything, it's not just reportage, but it's a completely, like, it was put in as evidence for ICC, the two Kwanis, because, there was all this stuff that we had, right?
Could you say what ICC?
International Criminal Court. The one that wants our president but doesn't want him anymore, but now has a vice president, and it looks like they're going to jail him. So there are those things. Now, to me, like, so for the Marikana thing, no question is that line drawn. And it's beyond, I think, a line drawn about the ANC. It is phenomenally about a failure of the ANC. But it's a very, 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 it's the thing that shall be gone back to in so many ways to understand why that project set off in the wrong direction and how and what it will recuperate. I don't think it's any different from Biafra in Nigeria. I don't think it's any different from PV in Kenya. But it's those things but that thing of reacting to the shock, of course in Kenya, for example, the reacting to the shock was a constitution that devolved things, which of course you will say, really getting back to the politan that we are supposed to be. Which of course now it just happens because an explosion so big happens somewhere, and then you deconstruct it again and deconstruct it. So Nigeria has been doing that thing for how many years? There are 4 federal states, not the 38. Sudan just announced 28. And then people are like, that is so stupid. I'm like, why? No, now, it's very stupid. There are many potential violences in the idea. But I'm like, there's just no way to be an African and accept what a status quo is. I don't mean be a revolutionary. That's not really the word that I'm trying to accept. Is that there's a certain kind of perpetual questioning to arrive at a beginning that's needed. To me, like, independence was like a deal. You're like, fuck, I don't know that guy. I really don't. I mean, we may have met in a plantation that we were commonly working for or not working for. So I recognized that ethnicity of course, that's what tribalism is, right? It's that, who are you in the plantation? Right? Who's defending what? Luos are defending the railway. This is what they do. These are defending this is what they do. So all those labor descriptions of how you fit, and then the people who are not Kenyans, or people who have not been allocated anything, a role in the colonial project. So now you're Tukana, So we're acting out all this thing, right? And but at the same time, there's these moments which in this particular case where there are stakes. Whether that stake is oil, or that stake is road, or that stake is just, I don't know, Facebook, so you're moving, whatever those things are. But the roads that when they open up, then you're moving your goods and services of passions and desires down that road. Then your real self pretends self. Chimurenga have done an issue, I think it came out in the last 3 months, on how these maps, there's this guy who just does interesting things with digital maps and like how older maps themselves are revealing themselves, right? So, I mean, Kenya did a certain successful job very well, right? If you think about my picture of Kenya, Kenyatta Kenya, middle class Kenya, it's like this heart-shaped thing. Now, this is how devastating the whole map is. You're like, it stands up. And then Somalia is just leaning there, pointy, without an agenda. Kenya is like 2 lines like this, like there, and they are balanced, right? So we have this upright thing there in the middle, and then Uganda has this big head going sideways, right? You see what I mean? Like these distortions where the map is put and how you are, right? And then all these other people are like, those are the ones who are the settler people. You see what I mean? So they were so formatted by settler politics. It's so much part of their identity. When Nigerians or Ugandans come to Nairobi and they're walking the streets, they're just like, no one says hello. No one talks to you. You can't ask anybody for directions. That place is strange. I'm like, if I'm going to... Nigerians will tell you, Nairobi is close. It's near like London or... So like, so why don't you move here and invest here with all your money? No, I think I'll go to London. Like, because you guys, your shit is fucked up the wrong way. Like, so I'm like, I'd better be taking it from the white people in London than yours, like your version, right? So but there's a certain spontaneous action that's been happening where people just take up routes and avenues which were not just older, but which have a more tactile relationship way to activate desires. And I, the word Kenyan desire I find, that's the problem with it, is that it only manifests itself fully in a crisis of 147 dead and a hashtag, which you forget. Like, when you put Kenyanness, you're just like, so there's one side of it which is like, well, like people like me who are in between, you're not you're not Kikuyu enough, you're not anywhere enough. You're always you're going to throw water on the street. Like, when people say something loud and Kikuyu nationalist on Twitter, you're like, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it. I have moral authority, I'm a writer, and I'm very well known in the world, and you better stop that thing and put your nationalism back in the box. And then there's a part of you which is not admiring the nationalism, but it's like all these failures of desire and passion. And not even economic freedom, it's like a bigger thing than that. I keep trying to understand in my head why the simple right for the El Molo who are 102, presumably, or that's what they keep saying, that they cannot go to university in El Molo. The reserving of the right to. Like the refusal to make it not. If in South Africa, everyone was like, well, the South Africans have made 11 official languages. And so, like every African were just sitting and saying, that is apocalyptic. It is the end times, they're coming. So now, a South African has the right to say, nah, I'm a vendor person, and I want to go and... So if they petition up to Supreme Court, I want to do my PhD in vendor, what are you going to do? So to reserve that room for the possibilities of these future, not nationalisms, but ways to organize, of course is like the most essential thing to do now. Even if nobody does anything about it, right? Yeah.
One more question.
Hi, my name is Rachel, and I think one of the ways that we can look at the history of the world really as a competition for social space, but you alluded to one social space in particular earlier, that there's a demand for social space among queers, was it, to articulate themselves or express themselves. Mm-hmm. And so I wondered what that social space looks like, if it's digital, if it's only digital, and then if so, how relevant is literature now that's not digital when thinking about these social spaces and opening up these social spaces?
I don't even know. I mean, increasingly, for me, but in my casual interactions, the increasingly younger queers are increasingly confident of their ability to transact and carry various worlds inside the digital space, because no one in the world knows how to password protect yourself in 9 different formats and be like, okay, that one I can send nude pics to, and then that one is my mother, and then they know me, all that shit, people, man, there's so even I don't know how to explain it, but the complicatedness of coming out, they're not different. But they've given them different accesses to start to build their own internal languages, right? In ways and in varying pipelines. So, you don't even have that situation with their generation as mine or younger, which were just like, well, we had a meeting and 12 people turned up to the party because we are the only queers, and so we just now have to like each other. So let us do, solidarity. You're like, so, because of that now, the length, breadth, they announce things and you're like, where were they? They were on a party in Eldoret. They all went. Who? 8 people. But they're a niche, and then there's another 8 they met there, and Snapchat, I don't know, all these sorts of networks. And, and what's interesting these days is how the platform, the old ones, like you're saying with Nifty, like Gaydar and Gerumi, which were for the oldies, when people are like, what's that? That sounds Victorian. But it's still there, right? So you can be, crossing all these formats. There are different formats for different classes. I think in terms of the hierarchy of class, highest income is Grindr, lowest income is Facebook. But then everyone has a way to be queer in Facebook, right? Because you have to. You can't. So you have to have the formal one, which is in your real name, or the way you can activate different ways of being queer with these avatars. So now, even now when people are friending me, I only know they're queer because the name is so completely improbable. There you're like, okay, that's a queer from Africa, because because they're called like Projector George. Then you see like a photo of an earlobe. And then there's like posts which are like, and of course, like, I don't know, young people spelling these days. Hiya is Ma, Numba. Here's my number. Then, of course, you have like the great gateways of BlackBerry, because now the last place in the world that BlackBerry is used is Nigeria. And because the BlackBerry pin apparently has never been breached. So, and which means that, of course, all Nigerians are queer. Like, you, like, I swear to God, like, Niger are just like, whatever it is at Fort Knox is my phone. Right. So it's so, like, everyone else is like, oh, yeah, I don't really password protect my, I said, BlackBerry pin. If you want to have game in Nigeria, if you don't have a BlackBerry pin number, you're like, oh, hi, I saw you on Facebook, wink. And you're like, my name is so-and-so. Who are you? Go away and die. Delete. But you say, hi, here's my BlackBerry pin number. You can take off your clothes and dance. Like, it's just like, I don't know what it means for literature. Like, all of us, maybe it's that, right? We are riding the beast. The things that politically are interesting in Kenya for me, for example, with no question, is the way the sex workers self-organize. The most important gay, social, or LGBT is Hoimas, to me, no question, and Mavenger and them. Like now, 4 sex workers were killed by a serial killer, women, in Nakuru last week. They were skinned, right? So they've gone to protest until the president spoke yesterday. Of course, he was like, somehow he was like, that's homosexuality, but who cares? The whole question is, these partnerships that male women sex workers are making to manage their own existence, protect their own dignity, safety. I've seen, Madenge has the phone number of every senior police officer in Nairobi. There's one that even like been managing for like 10 years. So he's just got a United Nations prize for LGBT helping. So he pursues, and he's the head of, he's like the OCS of one of the major police, Langata police station. And he's not even in the closet as a supporter, right? So if you are blackmailed, beaten, whatever, like you go through there and you call, and he's the person who will follow up and help to make that thing get arrested. And people are being put in jail for crimes against gay people, against sex workers. And, you know, it's far from ideal. But now, you know, that political space is a very, very critical social and political space. And the safe houses that it manages. And, yeah, it's the LGBT space suffers like many marginalized African spaces from all these middle NGOization and funding, and what budget lines from Amsterdam decide what is your priority, which is, by the way, the status quo, and so on and so forth. And so to look inside that direction is kind of crazy. But these sorts of self-supporting, making banks, healthcare, going to negotiate with insurance companies in Kenya are the most homophobic people ever, but getting a way to pay for your insurance if it's, all these sorts of things that people are doing, which are very gritty, material, question, defended, passionate. There's that. But we are waiting to see what East African Middle Class Alliance, LGBT, there's change. Like, there's a certain kind of improving language, but the situation, I think, of queers who are elite is just replicates or sometimes even worsens the elite relationship of our own society with anything that is the other. So, yeah.
So unfortunately, I think we have to stop there. However, we'll be around for a while, so if people want to grab some foods and coffees and all that good stuff, I'm sure our guests and answer a few more questions. And thank you guys so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you very much.